However, for decades, the third and final secret was kept in a sealed envelope in the Vatican.
Pope Francis has died at the age of 88 in the Vatican's Santa Marta residence. His passing has once again turned the world's eyes to a prophecy long shrouded in mystery. The third secret of Fatima, first revealed to 3 shepherd children in 1917. This secret speaks of a great spiritual collapse, immense suffering within the Church, and the martyrdom of a pope. Today, many believe the third prophecy has already begun to unfold before our very eyes. Yet most people remain completely unaware. What is this chilling warning, and what does it reveal about the dark road humanity is now walking? The last vision. Church bells tolled in Vatican City, Manila, Paris, and beyond as a tribute to the pontiff, a progressive reformer from Argentina. As the Church prepares for the complex process of naming a successor, many are descending on Rome to celebrate Francis's legacy as a champion of the poor who spoke his mind. He urged compassion for migrants, pushed for a frank conversation about the climate crisis, and condemned the devastation in Gaza. Within the Church, he also advocated for more inclusivity and worked to address its sexual abuse crisis. Pope Francis was a tireless shepherd of the Church, a beacon of hope, and a champion of the gospel. His deep love for the poor, unwavering commitment to peace, and bold witness to Christ's message of love and reconciliation have inspired millions of people everywhere. Leading with humility, he called us to a renewed closeness to Jesus and a missionary spirit that reaches to the peripheries. His vision of synodality, a church that listens, discerns, and walks together, profoundly shapes our church today. As we reflect on his life and legacy, it is fitting to return to a profound concern that deeply touched Pope Francis's heart during his lifetime. Fatima. Throughout his papacy, Francis held a special devotion to Our Lady of Fatima, recognizing the profound spiritual message entrusted to the world through the apparitions of 1917. His connection to Fatima was not merely symbolic, it was personal and enduring. Pope Francis maintained communication and offered heartfelt encouragement to Sister Lucia, the last living Fatima visionary, forging a bond between 2 souls united by unwavering faith. Their rare but meaningful exchanges invite the world to ponder anew the mystery surrounding the third secret of Fatima, a warning, a plea, and perhaps an answer hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to see. The increasing chaos in society is an obvious truth unfolding before us. Recently, the incident involving Trump has once again stirred the world and raised concerns about the future of humanity. The recitation of the Rosary led by Pope Francis at the shrine of Our Lady of Fatima, for all of us, we consecrate the Church and the world, especially those countries at war. As he prayed the Rosary, a profound silence encapsulated the collective voice of millions of souls, all united in the single wish for the world to put aside the horrors of war, every war. There was a long moment of silence in the chapel of the apparitions as he sat before Our Lady. The Pope prayed, with sorrow, for peace. Our Pope Francis's silent prayer was a sort of anticipation of the fourth mystery of the Rosary recited shortly afterward, which carried the same supplication at its core. For all of you who are watching this, please close your eyes, take a deep breath, then follow these brief, intense lines of prayer together. With childlike hearts, we consecrate to you our lives, forever. To you, we consecrate the Church and the world, especially those countries at war. Obtain peace for us. You, Virgin of the Way, open paths where it seems that none exist. The final sentence exudes complete confidence in the intercessory power of the Virgin Mary, surpassing any evil. The silence of Pope John XXIII. Silence can be deafening, and profound is the sound it makes. When Pope John XXIII read the third part of the secret in August 1959, he preferred silence on the text. It seems strange, almost cruel, that something so anticipated by the Catholic world would receive such treatment. We are, however, in a better position to understand John's silence, so let us listen to its echoes. After 40 years of speculation, the Holy See released the third part of the secret in the booklet, The Message of Fatima, in June 2000. The text was revealed to be a description of a vision that Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta saw on July 13, 1917. However, there was no explanation from Senior Lucia of the imagery in the text of the vision, and this fact posed a major stumbling block to understanding the text. It seems as though the Holy See was aware of this, as the booklet demonstrates a desire to provide an interpretation of the imagery using supporting documentation. The Carmelite convent of St. Teresa in Coimbra, Portugal, published a biography on Senior Lucia entitled A Pathway Under the Gaze of Mary. This is the convent where Senior Lucia spent the last 56 years of her life. The Carmelite's biography provides a previously unseen account from Senior Lucia about an apparition of Our Lady on January 3, 1944. During the course of this apparition, Our Lady made a distinction on the third part of the secret. She told Senior Lucia, "Write what they command you, but not what is given to you to understand of its meaning." Our Lady's command explains why the text published in the year 2000 was descriptive and not explanatory. It also provides a unique interpretation for the silence of Pope John XXIII. His silence unwittingly invited much speculation, but it might actually be an important clue. Could it be that his silence was indicative of his ignorance on the text's meaning? A predominant hypothesis arose on the third part of the secret, known as the fourth secret of Fatima. This hypothesis holds that there is a second text containing explanatory words of Our Lady. This explanation, according to the hypothesis, condemns the Second Vatican Council, or at least questions it. This hypothesis received much attention in 2006 or 2007 after statements were attributed to Pope John's personal secretary, Msgr Loris Capovilla, who allegedly affirmed the hypothesis. Interestingly, the same Capovilla provides an important clue about John's silence. Over many years, Capovilla gave many testimonies about the third part of the secret. In them, he never once stated that John actually understood the meaning of the vision. Capovilla spoke about the facts of what took place in August 1959, but said very little about John's actual mind regarding the contents. This fact is not shocking, as the only consistent detail that Capovilla revealed on this score was that Pope John made no judgment on the text and left it for others to decide. If all that John XXIII had on hand was the description, but not its explanation, then it made perfect sense for him not to publish it. Why? Cardinal Ratzinger gives us the answer. While presenting the text of the third part in June 2000, Ratzinger spoke about the nature of the text being symbolic and how it allows a margin for interpretation. He also indicated that there was an inability to understand the text at the time of John XXIII due to a lack of perspective. He pointed out that it made no sense to offer to humanity an undecipherable image that would have created only speculations. It was necessary to really wait for the moment in which the reality behind this vision disclosed itself. He also acknowledged that the Holy See had paid a price for the decades-long speculations. In other words, historical events had not yet unfolded to allow for a more complete understanding of the text. It took 40 years for those events to manifest themselves before the official interpretation of the Holy See was rendered and made public. Now, if there was an explanatory text from Senior Lucia available to all the popes since John XXIII, what need would there be to wait for this historical perspective? There isn't, but, unfortunately, the fourth secret hypothesis has persisted deeply in many quarters. For the past several years, that hypothesis has implied the existence of a massive cover-up on the part of the Holy See. As part of that implication, a supporting hypothesis arose that various prelates of the Church were engaging in a kind of mental reservation. According to this argument, a distinction was being made on the texts by Vatican officials, claiming that two texts existed: an A text from Senior Lucia, deemed to be authentic, the description, but not her other B text, the explanation, because it allegedly condemns Vatican II, something that would have been, of course, unacceptable to John XXIII. The basis for this hypothesis appears to be a reluctance to accuse directly the Holy See of lying. A direct accusation, however, might have been more realistic. The mental reservation hypothesis presumes a serious and protracted exercise on the part of several prelates of the Church going back to 1959. Any such effort would be a monumental order to maintain. In reality, it would create more problems than what is realistically possible. Both the fourth secret and mental reservation hypotheses, however, are now untenable after a letter that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI wrote to the French journalist Yves Chiron on March 15, 2016. In it, Benedict unequivocally and explicitly denied that there was a fourth secret, saying that all had been published. This being the case, presuming Benedict's veracity, no other conclusion is possible. Despite the fact that the proponents of the fourth secret hypothesis know of this letter, by all indications, they have not challenged it. Instead, they have focused upon a later communiqué from the Holy See dated May 21, 2016, that attributes a denial of a second text to Benedict XVI. By a paradoxical reversal of circumstances, then, who has the appearance of hiding something, the Holy See or fourth secret advocates? In the end, the silence of Pope John XXIII toward the third part of the secret might have been more revealing than was originally thought. That silence could well indicate not that he was going to push through an ecumenical council against a warning from Our Lady contained in an explanatory text that Pope John allegedly had on hand. Rather, his silence can be seen as an expression of his ignorance of the text's meaning, which he would not have had if a second explanatory text existed. Vatican revealed the hidden part of the secret. Here, then, is the vision of the third secret that was released by the Vatican on June 26, 2000. At the left of Our Lady and a little above, we saw an angel with a flaming sword in his left hand. Flashing, it gave out flames that looked as though they would set the world on fire. But they died out in contact with the splendor that Our Lady radiated towards him from her right hand. Pointing to the earth with his right hand, the angel cried out in a loud voice, "Penance, penance, penance." And we saw in an immense light that is God. Something similar to how people appear in a mirror when they pass in front of it. A bishop dressed in white. We had the impression that it was the Holy Father. Other bishops, priests, men and women religious going up a steep mountain, at the top of which there was a big cross of rough-hewn trunks, as of a cork tree with the bark. Before reaching there, the Holy Father passed through a big city, half in ruins and half trembling with halting step, afflicted with pain and sorrow. He prayed for the souls of the corpses he met on his way. Having reached the top of the mountain, on his knees at the foot of the big cross, he was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him. And in the same way, there died one after another, the other bishops, priests, men and women, religious, and various lay people of different ranks and positions. Beneath the two arms of the cross, there were two angels each with a crystal aspersorium in his hand, in which they gathered up the blood of the martyrs and with it sprinkled the souls that were making their way to God. The official Vatican interpretation of this is that it is a prophecy of the 1981 assassination attempt against Pope John Paul II. And of course, most of you are aware, Cardinal Ratzinger has stated that Catholics are not under obligation to accept this interpretation. Regarding what the Vatican released, there seems to be no reason to doubt that this is actually part of the third secret. The problems, however, show themselves in other areas. About the third secret, This was a vision seen by the seers in which a bishop dressed in white, taken to be the Pope, struggled up a mountain through a half-ruined city, followed by numerous Catholics of all ranks. At the top of the mountain was a rough wooden cross, and here the Pope and his followers were all killed. This vision was explained in 2000 as symbolic of the sufferings undergone by the Church during the 20th century in particular. Fatima fanatics have held hunger strikes, one even hijacked a plane, to try to force the Vatican to disclose the secret. During John Paul's first visit to the shrine in 1982, on the first anniversary of the assassination attempt, a knife-wielding Spanish priest tried to kill the Pope, but was wrestled to the ground by security officers. Pope John Paul II has always credited the Virgin of Fatima with saving his life. After he visited the shrine in 1982 to give thanks for his survival, a bullet extracted from his body was placed alongside diamonds in a gold crown worn by a statue of the Virgin. In 1991, on the 10th anniversary of the attack, he returned again to give thanks for his life, as well as for the collapse of communism, which believers say the Virgin of Fatima also predicted in 1917. On the solemn occasion of his visit to Fatima, His Holiness has directed me to make an announcement to you, Cardinal Sodano said, adding that the Pope wishes his pilgrimage to be a renewed gesture of gratitude to Our Lady for her protection during these years of his papacy. This protection seems also to be linked to the so-called third part of the secret of Fatima. Pope John Paul II did refer to the prophecies today, speaking of Fatima, where these times of tribulation were foretold, but he made no mention of the third secret. Instead, he once again gave thanks for the goodness of God toward me when severely struck on that May 13, 1981, I was rescued from death. This revelation helps to explain the Pope's conviction that Our Lady of Fatima saved his life in an attack that took place on the 65th anniversary of the first apparition at Fatima. The Pope believed that a motherly hand which guided the bullet's path delivered him from the threshold of death. The Pope first learned of the secret a few days after he was elected in 1978, the Vatican said. He did not announce it himself today, said his spokesman, Dr. Joaquin Navarro Valls, because he was personally involved. Vatican officials did not say why the secret was not revealed sooner after the assassination attempt in 1981. The fact that the Pope put the two dead witnesses to the Virgin's apparitions on the path of sainthood today was another sign of his devotion to Fatima. The two, Francisco and Jacinta Marto, are the first children ever beatified by the Roman Catholic Church who were not martyrs. Beatification, which is bestowed only on the dead, is the penultimate step before sainthood. For many decades, the third secret of Fatima was considered by many people to be one of the great mysteries of the Church. Because Our Lady's third secret, given privately only to Lucy, was held back for many more years, it led to much speculation and many conspiracy theories about its contents. What seemed clear was that the message reinforced with much more detail that humanity faced a very dire future filled with chaos if it did not turn away from sin. I think we can all agree, no matter what our religious or political bent, that the world is getting weirder and wilder by the day. And yes, that applies to the chaos that has seeped into the Church. Here's what Pope John Paul II said in 1980 during a visit to Fulda, Germany, when asked about the third secret. He replied, "If there is a message in which it is said that the oceans will flood entire sections of the earth, that from one moment to the other, millions of people will perish. There is no longer any point in really wanting to publish this secret message. Many want to know merely out of curiosity, or because of their taste for sensationalism, but they forget that to know implies for them a responsibility. It is dangerous to want to satisfy one's curiosity only if one is convinced that we can do nothing against a catastrophe that has been predicted." Later, Cardinal Ratzinger indirectly admitted in an interview that the third secret did indeed contain these catastrophic warnings. Cardinal Ratzinger's response, that revealing the third secret would add nothing necessary for the Christian to know, and that it would mean exposing the church to the danger of sensationalism, exploitation of the content, also seemed to confirm, albeit with prudent circumlocutions, that the contents of the third secret of Fatima did contain those disconcerting messages. Clearly, both John Paul II and Cardinal Ratzinger dodged the question. But why? If the third secret did not contain these frightening threats, why not just say so? A no would not have been sensational, and in fact, would have helped defuse the speculation. For decades, the world has known the main message of Fatima. The Blessed Mother warned that punishment would come, involving great sufferings for the world if mankind did not repent from its sins, especially sins of the flesh and bad marriages. But Our Lady also warned that wars are only punishments for the sins of the world. So, in 2000, when the Vatican revealed what it said was the third secret in its entirety, the collective reaction of many people was, "That's it?" People sensed a disconnect between the urgent warnings of Our Lady of Fatima throughout the years to repent, and the Vatican's bland report that everything about the third secret had already happened. For example, that the Pope would be attacked but survive. Instead, people look around and saw the world still sliding toward total corruption and evil, just as Our Lady warned. Who can deny that lawful man-woman marriage has broken down completely? Families are in chaos and suicide is legally sanctioned. The list of outrageous evils is well known, and it goes on and on. The reminder from Sister Lucia. Little did Sister Lucia realize that she also shared major insights with important Fatima-grounded guidance in her books and some letters. As worries about today's times multiply, she would say now what she did then to the troubled society she already saw on the horizon. In the memorable moment of our Blessed Mother's first appearance to the 3 children at Fatima, let's look at 13 of Sister Lucia's many insights, counsels, advice, and warnings. On another 13th, April 13th, 1971, Sister Lucia went right to the point, writing her nephew, Father José dos Santos Valinhor, a Salesian superior in Portugal. It is indeed sad that so many are allowing themselves to be dominated by the diabolical wave that is enveloping the world, and they are so blind that they cannot see the error. The principal error is that they have abandoned prayer, and thus they have gone away from God, and without God, everything is lacking in them. Without me, you can do nothing. What Sister Lucia recommends to us above all else is that you get close to the tabernacle and pray. In this, you will find the light, the strength, and the grace that you need to sustain you, and that you can pass on to others. Guide them with humility, with gentleness, and, at the same time, guide them with firmness, always with serenity, justice, and charity. Never think of the time you spend in prayer as lost. You will see that in prayer God will communicate to you the light and the grace that you need to do all that He requires of you. Truth does not cease to exist simply because unbelievers deny it. What was true yesterday remains true today and will still be true tomorrow, because Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. In times such as the present, when the family often seems misunderstood in the form in which it was established by God, and is assailed by doctrines that are erroneous and contrary to the purposes for which the divine Creator instituted it, surely God wished to address to us a reminder of the purpose for which He established the family in the world. God entrusted to the family the sacred mission of cooperating with Him in the work of creation. This decision to associate His poor creatures with His creative work is a great demonstration of the fatherly goodness of God. It is as if He were making them share in His creative power, making use of His children in order to bring forth new lives which will flower on earth but be destined for heaven. Jesus also said, Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. These false prophets are all those people surrounding us, trying to induce us to follow the wide road, to give free rein to our evil tendencies, caprices, vices, and disordered passions, all of which are contrary to God's law. They are the bad company that turns us aside from the right path of truth, justice, and charity. They are all those false prophets who deny the truths revealed by God, endeavoring to introduce new and erroneous doctrines in support of the disordered lives that they themselves wish to lead. The Lord gives us a rule by which to identify such people. You will know them by their fruits. Every sound tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears evil fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. These warnings must put us on our guard against ourselves and the maxims of the world around us. The only important thing for us is to do the will of God, be where He wants us to be, and do what He expects of us, always with the spirit of humility, conscious of the fact that we are nothing and that it is God who works through us and makes use of us to accomplish His work. In carrying out our everyday tasks, we must endeavor to be aware of God's presence. Call to mind that God and our angel guardian are close to us, see what we are doing, and in what frame of mind we are doing it. Hence, we must sanctify our work, our rest, our meals, our wholesome entertainment, as if they were an ongoing prayer. Knowing that God is present, it is enough to call Him to mind and from time to time say a few words to Him. I bless you, Lord, for your greatness and your goodness, for your wisdom, for your power, for your mercy, for your justice, for your love. This intimate and familiar converse with God transforms our work and our daily occupations into a true and abiding life of prayer, making us more pleasing to God and bringing down upon us extra special graces and blessings. All we have to do is to follow this word of life with faith. To follow it with faith, and also with the simplicity of a child, which, aware of its own helplessness, abandons itself in the arms of its father, where it rests and sleeps securely because it knows that its father will carry it safely, protect it, and lay it down to rest. And if it should happen to offend its father by disobeying one of his commands, it knows its father's heart and trusts in his love, and so runs to meet him, confessing its fault, confident of his forgiveness, and with the same confidence as before, throws itself into his arms. In God's eyes, we are all children. He is the father of the great human family. He rocks us all in the cradle of his providence and leads us all in the ways of love. Like children in their father's arms, confident of his infinite mercy, we shall know that our confidence will not be misplaced. The work of our redemption began at the moment when the Word descended from heaven in order to assume a human body in the womb of Mary. From that moment, and for the next 9 months, the blood of Christ was the blood of Mary, taken from her immaculate heart. The heart of Christ was beating in unison with the heart of Mary. And we can think that the aspirations of the heart of Mary were completely identified with the aspirations of the heart of Christ. Since we all need to pray, God asks of us, as a kind of daily installment, a prayer which is within our reach, the Rosary, which can be recited either in common or in private, either in church in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, or at home, either when traveling or while walking quietly in the fields. A mother of a family can say the Rosary while she rocks her baby's cradle or does the housework. Our day has 24 hours in it. It is not asking a great deal to set aside a quarter of an hour for the spiritual life, for our intimate and familiar converse with God. I believe that after the liturgical prayer of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, the praying of the Rosary, in view of the origin and the sublime nature of the prayers used in it, of the mysteries of the redemption which we call, and on which we meditate during each decade, is the most pleasing prayer we can offer to God, and one which is most advantageous to our own souls. If such were not the case, Our Lady would not have asked for it so insistently. Hence, in the message of Fatima, God calls on us to turn our eyes to the Holy Family of Nazareth, into which He chose to be born, and to grow in grace and stature, in order to present to us a model to imitate as our footsteps tread the path of our pilgrimage to heaven. Silence has fallen over the Vatican. The Catholic Church has lost its highest spiritual leader, Pope Francis, who has passed away at the age of 88. Pope Francis was not just a point of reference for Catholics, but for all of humanity, thanks to his compassion. What struck the world is that the Pope waited to say his final goodbye on Easter Sunday, such a meaningful day for Catholics. It's as if he wanted to hold on just long enough to say goodbye to all of us. During his public appearance at the Easter Mass, struggling to breathe, he gave final instructions to his flock. No one knew at the time that these would be a father's last words to his children. Looking back, everything he said was a warning to the world. The very last words. The death of Pope Francis has been announced by the Camerlengo, Cardinal Kevin Joseph Farrell, through a video released from the Vatican. The pontiff passed away on April 21, 2025, at 7:35 a.m. in his residence at the Casa Santa Marta, where he was convalescing. During the last month, his health condition worsened due to bronchitis caused by an infection, which was compounded by severe bilateral pneumonia. The entire world holds its breath at the end of a pontificate marked by closeness, reform, and commitment to the most disadvantaged. Despite his delicate health, Pope Francis wanted to keep his appointment with the faithful. In a wheelchair and without oxygen, he appeared on the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica on Easter Day 2025. From there, he gave his last Urbi et Orbi blessing. He asked Master of Pontifical Liturgical Celebrations, Diego Ravelli, to read the Easter message. Then he wished everyone present a happy Easter. The gesture was applauded by the nearly 50,000 faithful gathered in the square. The pontiff was visibly weakened. He spoke with difficulty, from his wheelchair, without oxygen cannulas. Even so, he delivered a brief message. Brothers and sisters, Happy Easter. During the Easter Sunday celebration, he delegated the main reading. In his message, he called for peace in the world's conflicts. He also lamented the disdain toward migrants and expressed opposition to rearmament. After the blessing, Pope Francis wanted to tour St. Peter's Square in the Pope-mobile, greeting the faithful who acclaimed him. He stopped several times to bless some children, showing closeness despite his fragile state. Today, that simple and brave gesture is remembered as his last farewell to the people. Despite his fragile state, he wanted to be present at the Easter celebration. His gesture has been interpreted as an act of faith and final dedication. Pope Francis, not long after, died within a few hours. The Camerlengo Cardinal declared, "Dear brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow I must announce the passing of our Holy Father Francis." It was the message that confirmed the news to the world. Pope Francis also left a final message on his social media. On his official X account, he wrote, "Christ is risen. In this announcement is contained the entire meaning of our existence, which is not made for death, but for life." These words now take on an even deeper meaning. Written just a few hours before he died, his message about life triumphing over death becomes a final testimony of faith. It was his way of saying goodbye, reaffirming that his existence, as he himself expressed, was not destined to die, but to transcend. Pope Francis has left an indelible mark on the Church and millions of faithful. His final message, centered on life beyond death, sums up his faith and his legacy. In 2025, the Catholic world bids him farewell with sorrow but also with hope. The succession process. All eyes turn to the conclave after Pope Francis's death. In the coming days, the Dean Cardinal, Giovanni Battista Re, will convene the cardinals. Only those under 80 years old, considered electors, must travel to Rome. Their mission will be to participate in the conclave and elect the next pontiff. The Vatican has reacted quickly to the Pope's passing. On April 23rd, the College of Cardinals was convened. The exequies will be held, and the general congregations will begin. This has been confirmed by the president of the Spanish Episcopal Conference, Luis Arguello, who has detailed that the general congregations will begin on April 23rd. These meetings will serve to prepare the way for the next conclave, in which the cardinals will elect Francis's successor. From that process, the new Bishop of Rome will emerge, who must continue the Church's mission in the current world. The conclave must begin between 15 and 20 days after Pope Francis's death. The cardinals will meet in the Sistine Chapel after a special Mass. Voting will take place up to 4 times a day. To have a new pope, a 2/3 majority is needed. By the time there is consensus, white smoke will emerge from the Vatican. Then the world will hear the traditional Habemus Papam from the balcony of St. Peter's. Arguello has asked the faithful to pray for the Pope's soul and to give thanks for his dedication and service to the Church. He has also called for invoking the presence of the Holy Spirit to illuminate the election of the next pontiff. His words have been filled with respect and admiration for the one who was, for more than a decade, the universal pastor of Catholics. The death of Pope Francis not only marks the end of an era, but also opens a time of reflection and transition for the Church. With eyes on the Vatican, the entire world now awaits the beginning of a new chapter under the leadership of the future Pope. The Pope of Peace and for Peace. We remember Pope Francis as a Pope of Peace through his tireless appeals and constant visits to show his closeness to those suffering the consequences of one of the most unjust human-made disasters, war. At his last public appearance, Pope Francis repeated what had become a slogan in his pontificate of peace. Everyone knew to expect it at the end of his audiences, but never did it lose its strength. During the Easter Urbi et Orbi blessing, the day before he died, the Pope's words echoed the countless appeals he had made over the years, urging world leaders to lay down arms and turn to dialogue. Even as he struggled to speak, having asked someone to read his message on his behalf, his voice, albeit weak, resonated across St. Peter's Square and screens across the world. From the first days of his 12-year-long pontificate, Pope Francis spearheaded the global Catholic movement for peace advocacy. Through words, actions, and deeds, he demonstrated his unshakable belief in the power of reconciliation, the importance of dialogue, and the urgency of ending violence in all its forms. Dubbed the Pope of the Peripheries, Pope Francis always took the time to remember those suffering from conflict. While praying for peace in areas that gain most of the media attention, he also never failed to channel his prayers to some of the areas most hard-hit, yet most forgotten by the world. One of his most symbolic gestures, and a particularly striking moment of his pontificate, was in April 2019, when he knelt to kiss the feet of South Sudanese leaders at the head of a country grappling with a horrific civil war. As he greeted President Salva Kiir and his rival Riek Machar in the Vatican, the Pope, in his humility, kissed their feet, urging the leaders to lay down their weapons and pursue paths of peace. His personal plea turned diplomatic when, 4 years later, in February 2023, he traveled to South Sudan. Along with the Archbishop of Canterbury and the moderator of the Church of Scotland, he warmly addressed thousands of faithful who had suffered and continued to endure the brutal consequences of war. Then, as he addressed the nation's authorities, civil society and diplomatic corps at the presidential palace in Juba, he warned them, "Future generations will either venerate your names or cancel their memory, based on what you now do." His cry for peace also looked to the legacy of wars past, the scars inflicted by the violent atrocities committed between nations and peoples, and ensuring that certain mistakes are never repeated. During his visit to Hiroshima and Nagasaki in November 2019, Pope Francis delivered a powerful plea against nuclear weapons. Standing at the atomic bomb hypocenter park in Nagasaki, on the same ground where atomic bombs had caused unprecedented destruction, he condemned the devastation caused by such arms and all who possess them, declaring, "The use of atomic energy for purposes of war is immoral, just as the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral." Pope Francis consistently sought to address the roots of destruction, urging those in positions of power to take responsibility. His advocacy for denuclearization was essential in this. So often, Pope Francis denounced the arms trade, repeatedly condemning those who profit from war. Addressing the United States Congress on September 24, 2015, he posed a haunting question. Why are deadly weapons being sold to those who plan to inflict untold suffering on individuals and society? Sadly, the answer, as we all know, is simply for money. Money that is drenched in blood, often innocent blood. He described the investment of money in weapons as madness and decried the debt linked to the black market of arms. As the world entered 2025, his message remained as urgent as ever. Stop colonizing people with weapons. Just as South Sudan was, many more of Pope Francis's apostolic journeys were dedicated to peace. In March 2021, he made history as the first pope to travel to Iraq. There, he brought a message of unity and hope to a nation devastated by years of conflict. In particular, his meeting with Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani in Najaf underscored the power of interreligious dialogue and mutual respect, and led to Pope Francis's statement that peace does not demand winners or losers, but brothers and sisters who, despite misunderstandings and past wounds, choose the path of dialogue. Most recently, in September 2024, Pope Francis visited East Timor, a young nation that fought long and hard for independence. His presence was a fierce sign of closeness to the most Catholic nation in the world, which struggled so long for freedom and is still healing from its past. There, as he celebrated Mass at Tasitolu for 600,000 people, the Pope reminded those present that you remained firm in hope even amid affliction, and thanks to the character of your people and your faith, you have turned sorrow into joy. Beyond his travels, Pope Francis has used his voice to intervene in global conflicts, appealing tirelessly for ceasefires and negotiations. In May 2014, Israeli President Shimon Peres and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas met with him in the Vatican for a prayer summit, demonstrating his belief that prayer and dialogue could pave the way for peace. Since then, as violence continued to escalate in the Middle East, in October 2024, Pope Francis made an impassioned plea for a ceasefire in Gaza, the release of Israeli hostages, and humanitarian access to those in need across the region. In that same month, after 1 year of the Israeli offensive in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and former Palestinian Minister for Foreign Affairs Nasser al-Kidwa presented Pope Francis with their peace proposal for the war devastating their nations. The Pope's closeness to those who suffer and his advocacy for an end to global violence were always a priority. Even in moments of personal difficulty, Pope Francis remained committed to peace. In his final weeks, throughout his hospitalization for bilateral pneumonia, Pope Francis took the time to video chat with the Holy Family Parish in Gaza, with whom he has been in close contact throughout the entirety of the Israeli offensive. In this holy year dedicated to hope, Pope Francis's messages, closeness, and care for peace are a legacy that will continue to resonate throughout the future of the Church and humanity. Remembering that his was not just a cry for an absence of war, but for the presence of justice, dialogue, and fraternity, for a world that is for everyone and not just for some, and in which those who have more never, ever forget those who have less. The low-cost funeral. The death of Pope Francis was unexpected. Although his health was delicate and concerning, almost no one imagined that the worst could happen so soon. Now, the focus is on his farewell and the next steps the Holy See will take to appoint his successor. Even so, Francis had already left instructions on how his funeral should be. Talking about one's own death is not easy. However, Pope Francis left everything prepared. He wanted a simpler funeral than previous ones. He considered that many aspects of papal funerals were too ostentatious. That's why he requested to minimize the most ceremonial elements. He wanted a dignified but sober rite, like that of any Christian. In his farewell, there will be no body displayed on the catafalque in St. Peter's Basilica, nor will there be a wake reserved for high ecclesiastical officials. There will be a single wake, open to the public. His wishes were put in writing weeks before. His body will be placed in an open wooden coffin in the Vatican Basilica. The casket will be closed just before the funeral mass. Francis also requested to be buried in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore. He had a special attachment to this place. There is the icon of the Salus Populi Romani, to which he had a great devotion. For that reason, he decided not to rest in the Vatican crypt. The papal seat will be vacant once the burial is held. Then, preparations will begin to choose the new pontiff. Then, the cardinals will meet in conclave. When there is a new pope, he will be presented from the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. The death of the pope activates a highly regulated process. Everything follows a series of defined steps. The first procedure is to certify his death. Only the chief of staff can officially announce it with the phrase, "Ver papa mortuus est," that is, the pope is really dead. Additionally, a doctor must confirm the pontiff's death. This was not always the case in the past. Then, the chief of staff has another symbolic task, to close and seal his room and office. This gesture has an ancient origin. It served to prevent theft or tampering. Once these rituals are completed, and the funeral is celebrated according to his wishes, the decisive stage begins, choosing the new pope. A legacy as a Catholic Church reformer. From working as a bouncer at a Buenos Aires nightclub to presiding over the Vatican, the path Pope Francis forged as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church was as unlikely as it was unprecedented. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio on December 17, 1936, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Francis was the first pontiff from South America, and not just South America, but the Americas overall. The son of Italian immigrant parents, his father, Mario José Bergoglio, was an accountant for the country's railways, and his mother, Regina Maria Sivori, a housewife. He studied chemistry before he entered the seminary, and he was 32 when he was ordained in 1969. 4 years later, Francis became head of the Jesuits in Argentina and was elevated to cardinal by John Paul II in 2001. Soon, Francis's name was on the short list of possible successors to the Polish pontiff, who died in 2005. But Francis was a runner-up that year in the conclave that elected German Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger to become Pope Benedict XVI. His turn came 8 years later, after Benedict's abrupt resignation. Francis took the reins of a church that was tarnished by financial scandals and still reeling the first papal resignation in 700 years. He moved quickly to re-establish order. He often likened the church to a field hospital after battle, where the first things priests need to do for their congregants is stop the bleeding. It is useless to ask a seriously injured person if he has high cholesterol and about the level of his blood sugars, Francis said. You have to heal his wounds. Then we can talk about everything else. Heal the wounds, heal the wounds. And you have to start from the ground up. The first Jesuit to occupy the chair of St. Peter, Francis took the name of Saint. Francis of Assisi, a 12th century figure who famously turned his back on family wealth in favor of a monastic life of service to the poor and the environment. Other popes have had the same message, but Francis has been very insistent in keeping this message at the forefront, servant leadership and caring for those most in need first. Francis cut a modest and almost deferential figure in his first hours as Pope on March 13, 2013, when he greeted the crowd gathered below his balcony in St. Peter's Square with a bow. The next morning, Francis returned to the boarding house where he had been staying to collect his belongings and settle the bill. Instead of the traditional papal apartments at the Apostolic Palace, Francis chose to live at the Casa Santa Marta, a simple residence in the Vatican used by official visitors. While Francis had little use for the trappings of the papacy, he understood the need for the pomp of the office. Like John Paul II, Francis was a skilled communicator who knew how to work a crowd. And unlike the more reserved Benedict, Francis was eager to embrace people and not just fellow Catholics. When introduced to Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp survivor Lydia Maximovich, he leaned over and kissed the number that the Nazis had tattooed on her arm. Francis spoke out against the idolatry of money and an unfair global economic system that forced millions to live in poverty. He stood up for the mostly Muslim migrants from poor and war-torn countries such as Libya and Syria who were seeking shelter in Europe. In his first official trip outside Rome, he celebrated Mass on the tiny Mediterranean island of Lampedusa to commemorate migrants who drowned while crossing the sea from North Africa. We have become used to other people's suffering. It doesn't concern us. It doesn't interest us. It's none of our business, Francis said during his homily from an altar built from an old fishing boat to symbolize the migrants' perilous crossing. Determined to pastor to the global church, Francis traveled extensively, visiting South America, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and the US. In 2021, Francis made the first visit by a pope to Iraq, risking his own security. He later learned of foiled assassination attempts against him, where he urged the country's dwindling number of Christians to stay put and help rebuild the country after years of war. Then, Francis condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine, calling it a negation of God's dream. "Let the desperate cry of the suffering people be heard," Francis declared. "Have respect for human life and stop the macabre destruction of cities and villages in the east of Ukraine." Francis met 3 times with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In 2015, Francis became only the 3rd pope to visit the White House and the first to address Congress, where he urged lawmakers to tackle climate change, a theme he returned to often over his tenure. When Joe Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement to limit global warming, the Vatican welcomed the move. In 2020, Francis elevated 13 clergymen from around the world to the rank of cardinal. One of them was the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Wilton Gregory, the first African American appointed to the Catholic Church's highest governing body. Gregory's appointment was significant for another reason. He was part of a select group of Catholic leaders who criticized Trump for staging a picture in front of St. John's Episcopal Church near the White House during protests over the police killing of George Floyd. Francis also helped broker a historic thaw between the US and Cuba before traveling to the communist country in 2015 and meeting with former leader Fidel Castro. In January 2021, Francis changed church law to formally allow women to serve as readers at liturgies and as altar servers, acknowledging in canon law what had already been taking place in many churches around the world and preventing more conservative leaders from blocking women from those roles. Then, in May 2021, Francis launched an initiative to make Catholic institutions environmentally sustainable in 7 years, saying a predatory attitude toward the planet must end. In July of that year, Francis reimposed restrictions on the old-style Latin masses. He said Latin-only masses were being used to divide the church, even though his 2 predecessors, John Paul II and Benedict, had allowed them. Pope Francis was keen to flex his muscles as supreme pontiff. He angered some Catholic Church traditionalists by reaching out to gay and marginalized people, demanding justice for the poor and the dispossessed, and railing against unbridled capitalism and climate change. As the first pope from the Americas, Francis was in many ways the ultimate Vatican outsider who charted a new and more liberal course as the leader of the world's 1.4 billion Catholics. He embarked on a real reorganization of the church, and a real reorientation of the church after 4 decades of conservative theologians leading the way, said David Gibson, director of the Fordham Center on Religion and Culture. Case in point, Francis announced a radical change in Vatican policy in December 2023 by formally allowing priests to bless same-sex couples. Still, he continued to oppose gay marriage, to the dismay of more liberal Catholics. Francis also ratcheted up action against the sexual abuse of children by Catholic Church clergy by issuing the most extensive revision to its law in 4 decades, calling it "Our Shame." And Francis steadfastly championed the plight of migrants at a time when many countries across the globe, including the United States, were closing their borders and right-wing politicians were demonizing them. The first signs that Francis's health was deteriorating appeared when the Pope started using a wheelchair after suffering increased mobility problems. Soon, the Catholic media and other news organizations began speculating on whether he would step down, like Benedict had done before him. Francis fueled those rumors further when he announced plans for a visit in August 2022 to the Italian city of L'Aquila for a feast initiated by Pope Celestine V. That pope also resigned while still in office, albeit more than 700 years before Benedict. With an eye on preserving his legacy, Francis in December 2024 elevated 21 new cardinals, all but one of whom were under the age of 80 and thus eligible to vote in a conclave to elect a new pope. That group included the 44-year-old head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in Melbourne, Australia, Mykola Bychok. Meanwhile, Francis was hobbled by bouts of influenza and other related health issues. He underwent surgery in 2021 to address a painful condition called diverticulitis, and in 2023, he had another surgery to repair a hernia. In January 2024, Francis appeared in a sling after injuring his right forearm in a fall at his residence. The Vatican confirmed that no bones were broken, but the tumble came weeks after the pontiff bruised his face in another fall in December, Reuters reported. Then, in February 2025, Francis was admitted to the hospital for bronchitis treatment and canceled all scheduled events for the next 3 days. It turned out to be pneumonia. After all, Francis may not have accomplished everything he hoped for, but he was a leader whose charisma and desire to connect with people will long be remembered. He's managed to give many people who had little hope in their church renewed hope. Why do we have a pope? While waiting and preparing for every important moment will happen in the church, let's get some crucial things about the leader of our spirit life. Jesus had countless souls who learned from him, but he only had 12 who he worked with quite intimately. They were sent out on a very specific apostolic mission after being trained by Christ himself. Out of those 12, there were 3 that he selected to be in his closest inner circle of friends: Peter, James, and John. Each of the 3 was given a special role in the church. Peter was the rock on which Jesus would build his church. As every group needs a leader, someone to cast the deciding vote, so did the apostles and the bishops. Simon Peter, the fisherman, rose to the occasion. In his line are popes who become saints and popes who were less than saintly. Yet every pope was given special authority by God to guide the church for a time. As humans, everyone has sins, including Peter himself and even his successors. So, why would Jesus entrust his church to sinners? It's not like Jesus didn't know that people were going to sin. He knows all. He's God. The church, like Jesus Christ, is both human and divine. So while the church is divinely fueled, guided by the Holy Spirit, and perfect in her teachings, it is still composed of humans who are imperfect. Sin exists in the pews just as much as it does in the sacristies, and even when people in leadership sin, that does not render God's laws or God's truths any less valid or truthful. Christ knew Peter was not perfect, yet he still chose him for an all-important task of guiding the church on earth. And so I say to you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. The event that Jesus changes Simon's name to Peter is a big deal. Why is it a big deal? Because a change in someone's name signals a change in a person's essence. While rock was used to speak about God and even Abraham in the Old Testament, Peter is the only person to be designated the rock by Christ. To be clear, this designation did not mean that Peter became divine. But let's say that it carries with it a divine assistance, an assistance that Jesus promises us. Jesus tells Peter that he is going to build his church. While that is a pretty straightforward statement, some people believe that the first time Jesus says rock, that he is referring to Peter, and the second time he says it, that he's referring to himself. Jesus promises that the netherworld will not prevail against the church. Okay, so what will evil never prevail against? The church. People point to modern problems within the church or a scandal as some sort of proof that Christ was talking about himself as the church, not a church on earth. Not true. Battles may be lost, but never the war. The church will always prevail. Christ promises us that. Jesus gives Peter the keys. The keys not only let people in, they lock people out. The keys signify power. This action, too, is biblical. As seen in Isaiah 22, the Prime Minister of Israel is given the keys, and with that, the power to govern God's people on earth. What Jesus was doing was not only landmark for the future, but also rooted in the past. Think about what it says in Luke 10:16, "Whoever listens to you listens to me. Whoever rejects you rejects me, and whoever rejects me rejects the one who sent me." Jesus gives Peter the power to bind and to loose. What does that mean? Sacramental power through confession and reconciliation. Ask yourself, how would Peter, the apostles, or any priest know which sins to bind or to loose if they had not heard the sins first? And Jesus is very clear. They have authority on earth that counts in heaven. Since Peter was martyred, we have been blessed with an unbroken apostolic succession. That is why we have had a successor to the chair of Peter ever since his crucifixion in the mid-1st century. Some claim that the church at times had multiple popes. That is not true. At certain times, there have been more than one person claiming to be the pontiff. However, there has only been one true pope at a time,